The forest was silent that night, only the sound of Darren's axe breaking the stillness of the ironwood trees. The tall trunks shimmered faintly blue under the twin moons. He worked alone as always. His beard was long, his hands rough, and his eyes tired from years of solitude. Darren was a lumberjack on the far edge of the human colony world, a planet where few dared to live alone. He lived in a small wooden cabin deep in the woods. No roads, no neighbors, no voices. Only wind, trees, and the crackling fire that kept him company. Some people in the colony town said Darren had lost his mind living out there. Others whispered he was hiding from something. Darren never cared to explain. He liked his silence. He liked the quiet rhythm of cutting, stacking, and sleeping. But that night, something strange disturbed his peace. As Darren sharpened his axe by the fire, a bright light appeared in the sky. Not a star, not a moon, but a moving ship. It came low over the trees, humming like a giant insect. Darren frowned. No ships ever came this far into the Ironwood region. He reached for his blaster and stepped outside. The ship landed nearby, stirring dust and leaves. 3 rough-looking men stepped out, their coats covered in strange symbols. Traders, the kind that worked in shadows. They smiled with yellow teeth. "Evening, lumberjack," one of them called. "We bring you something rare. Something useful." Darren said nothing. He only watched them. The leader, a tall man with scars on his face, pulled open the back of the ship. Inside was a cage covered with a thick sack. The cage rattled softly. Something small was inside, breathing fast. "This one can work for you," the man said. "Doesn't eat much, doesn't talk. A goblin from the wastelands. Caught her ourselves." Darren stared at the cage. He could hear quiet breathing, unfrightened, tired. "I don't deal in slaves," Darren said coldly. The man grinned. "Not a slave friend, a helper. You live alone, don't you? She'll carry wood, clean, cook. Obedient little creature." The second man lifted the sack just a little. A faint green hand slipped out, thin and trembling. Darren felt a strange pull in his chest and something like pity, something like fear. "How much?" he asked before realizing the words had left his mouth. The men smiled wider. "Cheap, just 1 gold bar or 10 ironwood logs. A fair trade for company in the dark?" Darren looked at the cage again. The creature made no sound, no movement. Something about it felt wrong, but something inside him, loneliness perhaps, whispered yes. He nodded slowly. "Take the logs. Leave it here." The traders exchanged looks, pleased. They took their payment, left the cage near his door, and returned to the ship. Before stepping inside, the scarred man turned back. "Don't remove the sack," he warned. "She hates light. Keep her covered and she'll obey." The engines roared, and soon the ship vanished into the clouds. Silence returned. Darren stood by the cage, unsure. The firelight flickered across his face. The creature inside sat still, wrapped in the sack. For the first time in years, Darren didn't feel alone. But the feeling wasn't comforting. It was uneasy, crawling under his skin. He opened the cage and gently pulled the small figure out. She was light, almost weightless. He placed her near the fire. "You'll stay here tonight," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. "Tomorrow I'll build you a shed outside." No answer. Only a quiet hum, but like a song. Darren froze. The sound was faint but familiar. It was a melody his mother used to hum when he was a boy on Earth. But no one on this planet knew that song. No one but him. His heart pounded. He took a cautious step closer. The figure in the sack stopped humming. Then, in a calm, clear voice and a soft like a human woman's, she whispered, "Darren." The lumberjack's blood ran cold. He stumbled back, nearly dropping his lantern. How could she know his name? He hadn't told the traders. He hadn't spoken to anyone in months. The voice was gentle but haunting, as if it came from a place deep in his memory. "Who are you?" he whispered. No reply. The figure stayed still, silent again. The fire cracked louder, throwing strange shadows on the walls. Darren couldn't take his eyes off her. The sack twitched once, just slightly, as if she was breathing faster. He picked up his blaster and kept it by his bed, but he didn't sleep. The hours passed slowly, the wind sighing outside, the strange presence sitting motionless by the fire. Every time Darren closed his eyes, he saw the glowing eyes of the traders, their twisted smiles. By dawn, his decision was made. He would remove the sack. He had to see what he'd really brought into his home. But deep inside, something told him that once he looked, once he saw her face, nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Morning came slowly through the ironwood trees, cold and quiet. The sky was gray and a thin fog covered the ground like smoke. Darren hadn't slept. His axe lay beside him, his blaster on the table, and the figure in the sack still sat where he'd left her, by the fire, perfectly still. He made coffee, his hand shaking. The smell of smoke and wood filled the cabin. He kept looking at the covered creature. She hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound since the night before. But Darren could feel her, not like a presence in the room, but like a thought in his mind. It made his skin crawl. Finally, he stood up. "I don't know what you are," he said quietly. "But if you can speak, you can answer me." No reply. Just the soft crack of burning logs. He took a slow step forward. The sack over her head was tied with old rope. He reached out, then stopped. His chest felt tight. The trader's words echoed in his mind. "Don't remove the sack." But the curiosity burned stronger than fear. He had to know. He untied the rope. For a moment, the sack stayed still. Then it slipped away. Underneath was not a goblin. Not really. The creature looked almost human. Her skin was a pale green, glowing faintly under the morning light. Her silver eyes opened wide, catching the reflection of the fire. Her hair was dark, long, tangled. On her neck, just below her ear, was a small metal mark, glowing blue like circuitry. Darren froze. She looked up at him, afraid but calm. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. Her voice was the same one from the night before, calm, human, and heartbreakingly gentle. Darren stepped back, his blaster half raised. "What are you?" he demanded. The girl blinked as if she didn't understand the question. "I'm Kyle," she said after a moment. "At least that's what I remember." "Kyle," he repeated, trying to make sense of it. "The trader said you were a goblin. A creature." "They lie," she whispered. "They are not traders. They are hunters. They hunt. People like me." Darren frowned. "People like you?" She nodded weakly. "I was made in the human labs. I escaped months ago. They caught me again. Sold me." She looked at the door, her eyes flicking nervously toward the forest. "They will come back tonight." "They always come back." Her words sank deep into Darren's chest. He didn't believe in stories about created beings. Hybrid experiments were outlawed decades ago. But the mark on her neck, it looked real. And the way she said it, like she'd already lived through hell, made him hesitate. Why would they come back? Darren asked carefully. Cale looked into the fire. "Because I am not supposed to exist." A chill ran through the cabin. Outside, a crow screeched, flying off into the fog. Darren's instincts flared. The air had changed, as if the forest itself was listening. He walked to the window. Through the mist, faint lights flickered between the trees, too steady to be fireflies, too slow to be drones. "They're already here," Kyle said quietly. Darren turned sharply. "You brought them here?" She looked down, ashamed. "They can track me. Through the mark." "Then we cut it off," Darren said, grabbing his knife. Cale shook her head quickly. "No, if you try it, we'll send a signal." He stopped. "Then what do we do?" Cale's eyes met his. "You hide. I run." But something in her voice, tired, hopeless, made Darren's hand tighten around the knife. "No," he said firmly. "I don't let anyone take what's mine." Her eyes widened. "Yours?" He caught himself, embarrassed. "I mean, I bought you, but I didn't know what they were. I won't hand you back to them." Cale smiled faintly for the first time. "You have a kind heart, Darren of Ironwood," he grunted, looking away. "Kindness gets you killed out here." A sudden thud hit the side of the cabin, then another. The wood groaned. Red laser dots slid across the window. Darren's instincts screamed. "They found us," Cale whispered. Darren grabbed his plasma axe, flipping the switch. The blade hummed blue. "Stay behind me," he said. Cale stood, trembling. Her eyes glowed brighter now, veins lighting up under her skin. Darren stared for a moment. She looked like a living circuit, alive with strange energy. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Helping you," she said. Her voice low and steady. Outside, something roared. Metal footsteps. Approaching fast, Cale raised her hands, and for a second, the air shimmered. Then a wave of light burst from her palms, sweeping across the cabin walls like a shield. Darren's mouth fell open. "What? How?" She turned to him, her eyes shining like silver fire. "You don't remember me yet," she whispered. "But you will." Before Darren could reply, the cabin shook as the door exploded inward, and the hunters stormed in through the smoke. The cabin door shattered into splinters. Smoke and red light filled the small room. Darren swung his plasma axe before he even saw who was inside. The blade hissed through the air, cutting clean through a black metal mask. The first hunter dropped without a sound. Outside, more shadows moved through the fog, silent, armored, and fast. They weren't human settlers. Their suits were built for killing. Down, Darren shouted. Cale dropped to the floor just as red beams burned through the window. The air smelled like hot metal and ash. The wooden walls hissed as they began to melt. Darren rolled to the side, grabbed his blaster, and fired back through the smoke. 2 shots hit, 1 missed. The forest outside came alive with echoing gunfire. Keel crawled behind a table, clutching her glowing hands. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They never stop." Darren gritted his teeth. "Then neither will I." He slammed a switch on the wall, the emergency shield he'd built for storms. The blue energy field flickered to life, covering half the cabin. It wouldn't last long under this fire, but it was enough for now. The hunters regrouped outside. Darren could see their red eyes glowing through the mist. They spoke through static voices, their words mechanical and cold. "Target identified. Hybrid Kale 7. Terminate the human asset." Darren's stomach turned. Human asset. That meant him. Kale looked up, panic in her voice. "They know your name too." "How?" He growled. "Because you used to work with them," she said softly. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. "What did you say?" Darren demanded. Kale's eyes shimmered. "You were one of them. Before they erased you." Before Darren could ask more, the shield cracked with a sharp sound. The hunters fired again, red beams ripping through the cabin. Darren tackled Kale, pulling her behind the stone hearth. Sparks flew. The fire died. The night turned darker. He reloaded the blaster and whispered, "You can fight, can't you?" Kale shook her head. "Not without hurting you." Darren gave a short, rough laugh. "Then aim away." Kyle's hands began to glow brighter, veins like threads of lightning under her skin. The air around her shimmered, bending the smoke. Outside, the hunters moved closer. Darren charged out first, yelling to draw their fire. Shots burned past him, one grazing his shoulder. He swung the plasma axe, the hum filling the night. The first hunter fell. The second tried to grab him, but Darren slammed his knee into the man's chest and fired the blaster point blank. Behind him, Kale raised her arms. The fog lit up with white light. A shockwave rippled through the trees. The hunters were thrown backward like leaves in a storm. Darren dropped to one knee, blinking from the flash. When he looked up, the forest floor glowed faintly where Kale stood, her power pulsing through the earth. But she looked terrified. "Darren," she said weakly. "It's happening again," her voice broke. Her body trembled as if electricity ran through her veins. The mark on her neck glowed red now, not blue. "Kyle, stop, you'll burn yourself out," Darren shouted. She screamed, not in pain but in defiance, and thrust her hands forward. The trees bent, the air rippled, and the last of the hunters fell with their armor smoking. Then she collapsed. The forest went quiet again. Only the soft hum of the dying plasma axe filled the air. Darren ran to her, catching her before she hit the ground. Her skin was cold, her breath shallow. "Kyle, stay with me." She opened her eyes slightly, silver and fading. "It were one of us," she whispered. "You promised to protect us." "I don't remember," Darren said, his voice shaking. "I don't remember anything." Her fingers touched his face gently. "They took your memories. They feared what you knew." Then her hand dropped and she went still. For a long moment, Darren just knelt there, his heart pounding, surrounded by the bodies of the hunters and the smell of burning wood. He looked around. His cabin was destroyed, his tools scattered, his peace gone forever. The fog began to move again, drifting between the trees like ghosts. Somewhere far away he heard engines, more ships maybe. Darren lifted Kale into his arms. She was light as air. "Who were you, girl?" he whispered. "And what did I do to you?" Her faint breath stirred against his chest. "You saved me once," she murmured, half-conscious. "Maybe. You can do it again." Darren's jaw tightened. He stood, gripping her close. "Then I will." He turned toward the dark line of mountains in the distance, where the mist glowed faintly red, a sign of cities, of answers, of danger. The lumberjack who had lived alone for 10 years took his first step back into the world. Behind him, the cabin burned to ash. The night wind carried the smell of smoke and metal. Darren walked through the mist, Kyle in his arms, her faint breathing the only sound beside his boots crunching on dead leaves. Behind them, his cabin was nothing but ashes and glowing embers. The forest that once felt safe now felt haunted, every shadow alive, every sound suspicious. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay. After hours of walking, he found an old logging shed he had built years ago, half collapsed and covered in vines. He pushed open the door and laid Kale on a pile of dry hay. She looked so fragile, her skin pale and dim, her glowing veins now barely visible. He sat beside her, holding a flask of water. "You need to wake up," he said softly. "I can't fight ghosts from my own past alone." Kyle stirred, her lips dry. "You remember something?" Darren shook his head. "No, but you said I was one of them." "What did you mean?" Kale opened her eyes slowly. The silver light inside them flickered weakly. "You were part of the Genesis program," she whispered. "Before they erased it from history," Darren frowned. "Never heard of it." "You wouldn't," she said. "They deleted every file, burned every record, but you were there." The wind outside moaned softly through the cracks of the shed. Darren stared at his reflection in a broken metal plate leaning against the wall. He saw a man with a scar on his temple, the one he never remembered getting. He always thought it came from an accident with an axe, but now, the thought it might be something else and something done to him sent a cold shiver down his back. "Tell me what happened," he said. Kale sat up slowly, wrapping a torn blanket around her shoulders. "Many years ago, humans began creating hybrid soldiers, part flesh, part energy, built for wars we weren't supposed to fight. I was one of the last born, and you were assigned to guard us." Darren's hands tightened around his flask. "Guard you?" "You weren't like the others," Kale said. "You didn't see us as weapons. You taught us how to speak, how to be human. You promised to help us escape." He blinked. His mind showed him flashes, lights, machines, the sound of children crying in metal rooms. He saw himself in a black uniform, leading them through tunnels. Then fire, then silence. He gasped and dropped the flask. "I saw it," he muttered. "Just now," Kyle nodded. "Your memories are waking slowly. The scar, it's not from an accident. It's from the device they used to erase your past." Darren leaned back against the wall, his heart pounding. "Why would I forget all this?" "Because you betrayed them," Kale said. "You helped us escape. You were the reason the Genesis program collapsed." He stared at her, unable to breathe for a moment. "So, I was a soldier who turned against my own people." "You were more than that," she said gently. "You were my protector." He looked at her again, really looked at her. The shape of her face, the way she spoke his name. It wasn't just familiarity. It was memory. "Deep-buried painful memory, I carried you," he whispered. "Out of the fire," Kale smiled weakly. "Yes, you did." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside was quiet except for the faint rustle of trees. Then Kyle's expression changed, fear in her eyes. "They'll send more," she said. "They always send more when a squad fails." "How do you know?" Darren asked. "Because they tracked me for years. They want the others too. The ones still hiding." "Others?" he asked. She nodded. "There were 6 of us. I don't know how many are still alive." Darren stood, checking his weapons. His shoulder still burned from the wound he got during the attack, but he ignored it. "Then we find them. Before the army does." Kale's eyes widened. "You would do that?" He nodded. "If what you say is true, then I owe them, and you." But before they could move, a deep rumble shook the air. The ground vibrated. Darren ran to the door and looked out. Through the fog, bright blue lights glowed from the sky. A dropship larger than the trader's vessel. It hovered above the forest, scanning beams sweeping the ground. Kyle's voice was trembling. "They've found us." "No," Darren said, watching the ship lower toward the trees. "They're not here for you," Kale frowned. "What do you mean?" The dropship's loudspeaker crackled to life. A calm, cold voice echoed through the woods. "Darren Holt, former Sergeant Unit 9. You are ordered to surrender yourself. The hybrid asset will not be harmed." Darren's heart stopped. They knew his name, his full name. Kyle turned to him slowly, her eyes wide. "They're here for you." He took a deep breath, gripping his plasma axe tight. "Then they'll get what they came for." The forest filled with light as the ship opened its doors and rows of soldiers stepped out. The forgotten war wasn't over. It had just found him again. Rain began to fall over the ironwood forest, slow, heavy drops that hissed on the leaves and turned the ground to mud. Darren stood in front of the old shed, the plasma axe humming in his hand. Kyle hid behind the door, her silver eyes glowing faintly through the shadows. The military dropship hovered low above the trees. Its engines roared, shaking the air. Searchlights swept across the clearing, cutting through the fog. Then the side ramp opened and soldiers in black armor marched out, precise, silent, and cold. Their rifles glowed with red scopes. A tall man stepped forward, his face hidden behind a half-mask. But even through the rain and the mist, Darren recognized that voice. "Stand down, Sergeant Holt," the man said. "You're outnumbered and out of time." Darren's heart clenched. That voice belonged to Captain Roulaine, the same commander who'd trained him, the same man who'd once called him brother. Darren took a step forward, axe still raised. "Didn't expect to see your face again," he said. Roulaine removed his mask, revealing a scar that cut across his cheek. His eyes were sharp but tired, like a man who'd seen too much war and lost too many pieces of himself. "You were supposed to stay forgotten," Roulaine said. "We erased you for a reason." Darren's voice was low. "Maybe you should have finished the job." The captain didn't flinch. "This isn't personal. Hand over the hybrid. The higher-ups want her alive. You walk away free. Full clearance, new identity, memory restoration. You'll have your old life back." Darren frowned. "My old life? The one you burned out of my skull?" Roulaine sighed. "You betrayed your own species once. Don't make the same mistake again." Kale stepped into the light, trembling but defiant. "You lied to us," she said to Roulaine. "You said we were made to protect humanity." Roulaine's eyes flicked to her. "You were made to serve it." Darren's grip on the axe tightened. "I remember now," he said quietly. "You ordered the purge. You killed the children." Roulaine's jaw tightened. "We did what had to be done. You know what those hybrids were capable of. One of them destroyed a whole colony base in an hour. Because you tortured them," Darren shouted. For a moment, the rain was the only sound. Roulaine looked at him, not with hate but with sadness. "I'm giving you a chance, Holt. Hand her over. Get your memories back. You'll understand why we did it." Behind him, the soldiers raised their rifles. Kale's breath quickened. The blue veins on her hands began to glow. "Darren," she whispered. "Don't trust them." He didn't answer. His mind raced. The offer tempted him, not because he wanted forgiveness, but because he wanted truth. He needed to know who he was before all this began. But then he looked at Kale, weak, frightened, still trying to be brave, and remembered the small, trembling child in his flashbacks, holding his hand as the fire burned behind them. No, he couldn't give her up again. He lowered his axe, pretending to think. "All right," he said slowly. "You win. I'll hand her over." Kale's eyes widened. "What?" He gave her a small look, one that said, "Trust me." Roulaine nodded, motioning for two soldiers to step forward. They grabbed Kale roughly by the arms. Her power flickered, but she didn't resist. Darren walked toward Roulaine, hands empty now. Rain slid down his face. "You said my memories." "All of them?" Roulaine nodded. "Everything, the labs, the missions, even the girl you—" He never finished the sentence. Darren's plasma axe snapped to life with a blinding blue flash. He swung upward, slicing through the rain. The nearest soldier fell instantly. Kale dropped to the ground, rolling away as the others opened fire. "Traitor," one shouted. Darren fired his blaster in return, using the dropship's own lights as cover. The air turned into chaos. Flashes of light, rain hissing against hot metal, thunder echoing above. Roulaine ducked behind a crate, yelling, "Hold your fire! We need them alive." Kale crawled to Darren's side, her hands trembling. "You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did," he said, reloading. "Now move!" She closed her eyes, focusing. A wave of energy burst from her palms, knocking two soldiers back into the mud. Roulaine rose from cover, blood on his arm. His voice roared through the storm. "You can't save her, Holt. She's a weapon." "You both are." Darren's eyes burned with fury. "Then I'll be the kind that fights back." He grabbed Kale's hand, pulling her toward the forest as explosions rocked the clearing. The dropship's engines screamed, and the soldiers' lights faded in the distance as the two vanished into the mist. By the time Roulaine's men regrouped, the forest was empty, only footprints in the mud and the distant echo of thunder. Inside the trees, Darren and Cale stopped to catch their breath. Rain dripped from the branches. Darren looked back at the distant glow of the burning clearing. Cale touched his shoulder gently. "You could have left me," he shook his head. "I already did once." "Never again." She smiled faintly, the silver glow returning to her eyes. "Then you're not the man they erased." Darren looked toward the mountains ahead where lightning flashed against the horizon. "No," he said. "I'm the man they're going to remember." Far behind them, Roulain watched from the dropship, his face cold. "He's coming back to himself," he muttered. "And when he remembers everything, he'll be our biggest threat." The storm deepened, and the war that never truly ended was beginning again. The rain stopped before dawn, leaving the forest silent and silver under the first light of day. Darren and Cale rested in the hollow of a fallen ironwood tree, the damp air heavy with the scent of wet soil and smoke from the battle they had barely escaped. Cale sat beside him, wrapping her arms around her knees, her glowing veins dim and weak. "They won't stop," she said softly. "They'll hunt us until we're dead." Darren stared at the faint mist rising from the ground. His shoulder burned from the bullet wound he'd taken the night before, but he didn't feel it much. Something else was eating at him, something inside his head, a sharp pulsing pain that came and went like a memory trying to break free. "I don't run from men like Roulain," he said finally, "but I need to know what they really did to me." Kyle looked at him carefully. "You're remembering, aren't you?" "Bits and pieces," Darren said. "Flashes of light. Corridors, alarms, people screaming. I remember your voice as a child, calling my name through the smoke. I carried you through a gate, didn't I?" Cale's silver eyes softened. "Yes, you carried me through the fire when the base exploded. You saved the others too. But they caught you. They couldn't kill you, you knew too much. So they wiped you clean." Darren leaned against the tree trunk, his breath shaking. "Then who was I before that?" She hesitated. "You were a commander, one of the first soldiers enhanced by the Genesis Project. You were human, but not completely. They used you to control us, the half-machine, half-man. That's why you could hear our voices without words." He touched the scar on his temple. The pulse behind it throbbed harder now. "So I'm one of their creations too," Cale nodded slowly. "Yes, but you broke free. You chose to protect us. That's what makes you different." Darren closed his eyes. The memories came faster now. Soldiers shouting, alarms blaring, the burning scent of chemicals. He saw his own reflection in a glass wall, eyes glowing faintly blue just like Cale's veins. He saw Roulain giving the order to erase everything. When he opened his eyes again, they were glowing faintly. Not silver like Cale's, but blue. Kyle gasped softly. "It's happening. You're waking up." Darren stood, his mind clearer than it had been in years. Every sense sharpened. The smell of damp earth, the hum of electricity deep in the soil. Even Cale's heartbeat beside him. It was all there, like a song he'd forgotten how to hear. "They took everything from me," he said quietly. "My past, my purpose, my people." Cale placed her hand on his arm. "Then let's take it back." He turned to her. "Where do they take the captured hybrids?" "To the Ascension base," she said. "The place where we were made. It's hidden under the old mines near the eastern ridge. That's where they'll bring the others, and where Roulain will wait for you." Darren nodded slowly. "Then that's where we go." Kyle hesitated. "You don't even have a plan?" He gave her a small, grim smile. "I don't need a plan. I just need my memory," she frowned. "And if they finish what they started, if they erase you again?" He looked toward the mountains where lightning flashed faintly in the distance. "Then they'll have to catch me first." They traveled for hours through the forest, moving silent and careful. Darren's body adjusted quickly and too quickly. His speed, his strength, even his vision were no longer just human. At one point, he stopped Cale before she could step on a hidden sensor buried in the ground, something he somehow sensed before seeing it. Cale noticed and whispered, "Your old abilities are back." He didn't reply. But inside he could feel the truth. The soldier he used to be was waking up, and it scared him more than the army chasing them. By nightfall, they reached the edge of the old mining cliffs. Below them, hidden under holographic camouflage, the Ascension base pulsed with faint blue lights, a giant wound carved into the mountain. Cale stared at it, her hands trembling. "That's where I was born," she whispered. "Where everything began." Darren looked down at the endless lights, his jaw tight. "Then that's where it ends." Before they could move, a sound broke the silence, the hum of drones sweeping above. Darren grabbed Kyle's hand and pulled her into the shadows. They pressed against the rock wall as searchlights passed overhead. Kale whispered, "They're scanning for us." Darren's eyes glowed brighter now. "Then let them find me." She turned to him, alarmed. "What are you doing?" "Ending this," he said simply. "If I go in alone, they'll take me to Rulain. That's where I'll find what they're hiding. My memories, the truth, maybe even the others." Kyle shook her head. "You'll die, maybe," he said. "But if I don't go, they'll destroy what's left of you." Before she could stop him, he stepped into the light. The drones turned, locking onto him instantly. The mountain below stirred, alarms flashing red as the base came alive. Kyle reached out, her voice trembling. "Darren." He looked back once. "Trust me, Kale, you said I saved you once. I'm just keeping my promise." Then he raised his hands as the soldiers descended, letting them take him, not as a prisoner but as a man walking straight into his past. And for the first time, Darren Holt remembered exactly who he was. The air inside Ascension Base was cold and metallic. The walls hummed with energy, blue veins of light running through steel like living nerves. Darren walked silently between two guards, his wrists bound in magnetic cuffs that pulsed every few seconds. But his eyes, glowing faint blue now, were calm. He was no longer the quiet lumberjack who once chopped trees and lived alone. That man had died in the fire. What walked now was something older, something buried deep inside him, a soldier who remembered everything. As the elevator doors opened, he stepped into the main chamber. The place looked more like a cathedral than a lab, tall glass pillars filled with swirling liquid, and inside each one floated a faint human shape. Hybrids, dozens of them, sleeping, waiting. At the far end stood Captain Rulain, surrounded by consoles and soldiers. His armor shone black under the cold lights. When he saw Darren, he smiled faintly. "So the prodigal soldier returns," Rulain said. "You could have lived peacefully in your forest. Why come back?" Darren's voice was calm. "Because peace built on lies isn't peace." Rulain motioned to the guards. "Leave us." When they were gone, the captain stepped closer. "You were our best creation, Holt. The first hybrid soldier to stay loyal to humanity. Or so we thought. Until you turned. I turned because you made children into weapons," Darren said. "You made her into one." Rulain's jaw tightened. "Kyle was never a child. She was a design flaw. You became weak because of her. She made me human again." Rulain laughed softly. "Human? You're not even sure what you are. But don't worry, we'll fix that." He tapped a control pad and one of the glass chambers began to drain. Inside it, Kale hung suspended, wires attached to her body, her skin faintly glowing. Darren's chest tightened. "Kale," Rulain spoke over the hiss of machinery. "She's the final key to the Genesis core, the device that will reset every hybrid mind on this planet, including yours. We'll erase all this chaos, start over. Order from chaos, Darren, just like it was meant to be." Darren's voice grew low. "You're going to kill her to make your machine work." Rulain smiled sadly. "She's not alive the way you think. She's energy wrapped in skin. Her power will save us all." Something inside Darren snapped. The faint hum in his cuffs changed pitch and then stopped. He twisted his wrists once and the restraints shattered into sparks. Rulain's eyes widened. "Impossible!" Darren lunged forward, slamming his fist into the control console. Sparks exploded. Alarms wailed across the base. The chamber holding Kale shattered, flooding the floor with glowing blue liquid. She fell forward into Darren's arms, weak but alive. Her silver eyes flickered open. "You came back," she whispered. "Always," he said. Soldiers poured into the room, weapons raised. Darren grabbed a fallen blaster with one hand and pulled Kale behind a support beam. He fired with precision, not as a lumberjack, but as the soldier he once was. Kale's veins flared with light again. "I can end this," she said. "If I overload the core—" "No," Darren said sharply. "That'll kill you." She looked up at him, tears glowing silver on her cheeks. "You said peace built on lies isn't peace. You can't stop them all, Darren, but I can." He shook his head, grabbing her hand. "You're not a weapon. You're Kale." Her smile was sad and gentle. "And you're not a machine." Before he could stop her, she ran toward the central reactor, light trailing from her steps. The soldiers tried to aim, but their systems flickered. Kale's power was already surging through the base. Rulaine shouted, "Stop her!" Darren charged after her, cutting down 2 guards. "Kale!" She turned at the reactor's edge, her body glowing bright as a star. "Go," she said. "I'll keep my promise this time." Darren froze. "Promise?" Her voice was soft, but it filled the whole chamber. "Long ago, when you saved me, I told you I'd protect you next time. This is that time." The light around her grew blinding. Darren reached for her, but the shockwave hit first. The explosion roared like thunder, ripping through the steel walls and shaking the mountain above. When Darren opened his eyes, everything was quiet. The lab was gone, nothing left but broken glass and the faint glow of burning circuits. He stood alone in the ruins, ash falling like snow. Kale was gone. Only a single fragment of her necklace and a small silver crystal lay in his palm, still warm. Outside, dawn broke over the ridge. The war was over. The Genesis core was destroyed. Darren walked out into the morning light, the crystal clutched in his fist. He looked toward the forest where he once lived. Now quiet. Peaceful again, he whispered, "You were right. Kyle, you saved us." A soft wind blew through the trees, carrying a faint hum, her song, the same melody she'd once hummed by the fire. Darren smiled through the tears in his eyes. "You thought I bought a slave," he murmured, his voice breaking. "But what I really found was my reason to be human again." He turned toward the mountains, the rising sun glinting off his axe. Somewhere far away, the wind whispered his name, and he walked on. No longer a man running from his past, but one walking toward it. And thus ended the story of Darren Holt, the lumberjack who defied gods and machines for a single spark of humanity.